am Mary Ann Clyde.
And I'm Lorna McGill. Welcome to the Isn't She Amazing website where we podcast, where we highlight women over 50 are doing amazing things in their everyday lives. Today, our guest is Renee Norden. She's the executive director of the Mental Health Association for Fauquier County. And we are looking forward to an interesting discussion on just the mental health issues or challenges that women over 50 face.
And as we're recording, it's Mental Health Awareness Month.
Oh, that's right.
So welcome, Renee. We're glad you're here.
I am happy to be here. I am also one of those women over 50. And so happy to share what individuals out there might be experiencing.
Well, so there's a huge number of people in general who experience anxiety and depression some point in their lives. And would you say women over 50 are more prone to those kind of struggles or less prone than younger women? Do you have an opinion on that?
I do have an opinion. And first, just to let you all know, we are in an epidemic right now for mental health across the board. We know for adults that epidemic was fueled by the pandemic. For youth, it actually started 7 or 8 years before that with the introduction of the cell phone. But for women over 50, I think there is opportunity for mental health concerns to develop because a lot of times during that period, we are changing roles. So it might
Amen, sister.
that, our children might be going off to college or might be going out to the workforce, our jobs, that we, may have been prioritizing might be changing. And all of a sudden we are in roles that we didn't expect to be in, or all of a sudden we're thinking about changing roles. Even in my position here, I've only been at the Mental Health Association for a little over 2 years. Before that, I was working in schools. And, you never know when opportunity knocks, but I was approached when our previous executive director had to retire unexpectedly. And my boss at my previous job already thought I was going to be looking because I was going to be an empty nester. But I was like, oh, no, I'm not going anywhere for a year. I want to sort of adjust to being an empty nester. And of course, that didn't work out.
Right.
And so I think, surprise, for us over 50, I think it really is like allowing ourselves time and allowing ourselves to redefine ourselves. Because when you don't, I think is when that anxiety, that worry, because we know that stress, I don't know if there are any procrastinators out there, but for procrastinators, we need that stress, right? And stress is, unite focus, sort of. It is I'm worried about this proposal I have to do. I'm worried about moving my son or daughter out of college or moving them into their first apartment. When it develops into more than that, it's more of that anxiety feeling that something's not going to be right, an overall, arching feeling. And that goes hand in hand with depression. So a lot of times you'll see both together. But in those changing roles, I think the way to sort of circumvent that is really think about, give yourselves time to sit and understand that there will be feelings of anxiety when you're changing roles or feelings of stress. That doesn't have to develop into anxiety. There'll be feelings of depression, letting things go. I thought it was interesting for me when I left my previous position, everyone was like, oh, you have to come back and visit. But going back and visiting where you used to work, it isn't the same thing.
No, it's not. It's not. Things have changed, and we need to accept change. One of the things you can count on in the world is change.
Right.
And I think part of it, let me see your opinion on this, but I think part of what raises anxiety and deepens a depression is our resistance to change. This is not the way it's supposed to be. I was not supposed to lose this job. My husband was not supposed to leave or die. I was not supposed to get this diagnosis. My child was not supposed to get arrested. whatever it is we resist that stuff.
Mhm.
Do you think that leads into
Of
a
course,
deeper spiral of, I call it the
exactly. And
spiral
for
of despair?
me, yes, for me, it's more, it isn't supposed to. It is our illusion of control.
Absolutely.
And
And
we have that. Everybody has
We
that.
all have that.
right. And so
I
for
got
us,
this until I don't have it.
right. Also for us, that pandemic, I still remember when my high school senior called me and said, the governor has sent us all home. And she's crying because her soccer season. And in my
over.
illusion of control, I was like, oh, honey, it's going to be okay. 4 to 6 weeks, we'll get it all figured out. Soccer will resume. You'll be fine. No. And so here we are stuck in our homes, with the pandemic. And I went into a classic stage of trying to have everything perfect.
Ah,
Cleaned my house. I did all those little jobs that were on my to-do list. And
mhm.
somewhere in my head, I thought that if I did all those well, then the pandemic would end and we would go back to being normal. And of
So
course it didn't.
Well, and I think also like that, like for me, even like that pandemic gave me time to stop.
Right.
Like I had never stopped. And all of a sudden, all this stuff started bubbling up that I really hadn't dealt with.
Right.
And I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't like busy myself by running off and doing something. Like I had to face it. I think that's also what a lot of people have had to, all of a sudden you're like, yikes, I've been ignoring that all my life. And it's really big. And then that takes you, that causes, I mean, for me, that caused anxiety because I couldn't control it. And I knew I had to do something.
yeah. And that, I guess, is if you're talking with an external locus of control and an internal locus of control, it's when the world just seems like it's spinning out of control. That gives us anxiety until we can regain our internal locus of control.
Mhm.
And Renee, how do you suggest that people do that? What's there a way we can kind of come back and say, I can't control this or this or this or this or this, but I can control this.
Right. And so for me, one of the great things that illustrated it, unfortunately, my father has had some aging difficulty and, has ended up in assisted living. And for me, the assisted living place would call because he had done this or he had done that or he wasn't doing this. And I was getting very stressed. In fact, when I would look at my phone and I would see it was the number, it was almost like the principal was calling.
And your kid's been disobedient.
Yes, right. The kid has done something. Well, now it's my father.
Right.
And I finally had to take a step back and go, wait a second. It is not my responsibility to control him. The only thing I can do when I answer that phone is listen to the concern they have, find out why it is a concern, and then respond. So for me, anytime I felt that sort of that stress or that tightening that you feel or that racing thoughts that you feel, I would write down what I was concerned about and then go, wait a second, how much of this do I have control over? And if I didn't have control over it, I had to physically like cross it off my list and know that my true response was, okay, how am I going to respond differently now? Because yes, if you want to worry and if you want to ramp yourself up and you want to do all that, well, you can jump into all sorts of things.
But that's too, it's when you said they would call you with every little, he's not doing this, he's not doing this, he's not eating, he's up at night. That's their job.
Right.
Is to monitor that. But I don't think it's necessarily their job to dump their anxiety on you.
Right.
And I think people do that. So how do we stop letting other people in our everyday life? Okay, you can't stop them from dumping on you unless you just say stop.
Right.
Which is a really good thing to be able to say. But when they do, how can we, I don't know, resist it or dump it back on them or just get it out of our head? What's a good way to
For
to
me, it's not
manage
owning
that?
it.
It's not what?
Owning it.
Okay.
For me, is not taking it in and putting it in my like bucket of responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
So when they call, I say things like, well, I'm so sorry that he's doing this. Have you had, previous residents who have had this issue? What has been done in the past that has worked? Let's try that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then the trick is when you hang up or you leave that person, to let that conversation go.
Shake it off.
Shake it off.
Yeah. Well, that when you turn it back on them and say, so what could you do about this?
Mhm.
That enables you to kind of, like you said, not accept it. And I love the activity that you do by writing it down
Mhm.
and then crossing it off when you read over
That's
it and go,
huge.
that's not my stuff.
Yeah.
And so only taking responsibility for what is yours to take responsibility for, because that sandwich generation sounds like you're right in it,
Yes, exactly.
and that gets pressure. It's
Yeah,
just
that's
it's
really
hard
hard.
to deal with because you've got how old are your kids now?
My kids are 20 and 23.
As they're just becoming
Right.
adults and walking into
Mhm.
and they still need you, and then dad needs you over here, and it's just this big smush. Mama's in the middle.
Well, and it's also hard because you're also like you started when you first started talking, Renee, you're also at this point of transition when
Right.
you're like, now what do I do? Like now
Mhm.
my role is so different, both with your parent and with your kids.
Right.
And so that's like just it's hard. So it's hard to just like pause and think, okay, let me think about what I want to do, because you still have all these competing priorities that are pretty important that you have to deal with like now. So
I also think for all of us, I don't think anyone really prepares you for parenting your parents. Like, no one told us when we were growing up that, oh, by the way, when you think that you're going to be an empty nester and then your kids are going to take off and you're going to be footloose and fancy free, no. There are
Added
these things that happen.
responsibilities.
Right.
Yeah.
yeah.
And sometimes those are pretty intense,
Mhm.
because that comes to the decision of, so what do we, how do we help mom? Or
Right.
how do we
Yeah.
help dad? Are they better off in their house by themselves, or do we have to sell their house? Is that
Right.
my responsibility or their responsibility? It's just,
Well, and then you get all the resistance from them because they don't want to leave their house. And so I don't know anybody that's gone through that process. I went through it earlier with
Mhm.
my parents, but it was, that's a hard, and
Mhm.
then it is, and you're parenting, and you're like, the decision is no longer yours. Like, we're gonna have to move you. And that's really hard.
It really is. And that's why I encourage people when their parents are younger,
Mhm.
have these conversations.
mhm.
Yeah.
There are great workbooks out there that the parents can, you all can work through. Say, if this situation happens, what is your desire? What are the plans?
Wow, that's good preventative stuff. And
Right.
so that in itself is just good advice, is what can you prevent that
Mhm.
will keep the anxiety minimized and keep the depression at bay. And so how can a woman over 50, so yes, we can do that with our parents. That's one of
Mhm.
a million transitions a woman experiences at that time, because there's all kinds of things. There's like holidays change. The
Mhm.
kids actually get a life apart from us. I mean, we raise them to do that, and then they do that, and we get pissed.
Those suckers, they left me. I can't believe they like deserted me. Well, and also like, what's your relationship with your
Mhm.
kids? Because it's different. And I always say they now have the choice to spend time with us.
Mhm.
It's their choice. It's not our choice anymore. And so what's that dynamic? That's really hard to maneuver through also. Especially I think our generation of moms, we were so hands-on. And
It
now
is.
we're not.
But again, I love that. So how can you prevent those? You can't prevent all kinds of conflicts from arising, but you can prevent, you can be always making yourself that someone that is confident and independent and interesting, and someone that your kids would like to spend time with when they can. Like if we're always nagging and you're hands-on and you continue to be hands-on,
They're not going to see you.
now it's like, why didn't you answer my text? Why did, you know I mean, we have that conversation all the time, but it's like,
Yeah, my question, finally I'll just answer, are you alive? Yes or no.
Yeah.
You don't have to answer anything else. Yes or no, are you alive? But that's hard, right?
It is hard. And I guess having thoughts about, is we have to control our thoughts. Again, I guess that's the part of that internal locus of control. It's like, well, they don't love me. Is they're ignoring me? When they're looking at their phone and it's like, oh, it's just my mom. It's just, and we get offended by stuff like that. When the fact is, everybody does that at some time. This is not a good time for me to talk. It's okay. And that we need to take initiative. If we want to see our kids, we can call them, we can visit them, we can invite them to an outing or something. What can I do? Which is exactly, Renee, what you were talking before about your conversations with the people from the assisted care facility.
Right.
It's like, what can I do to minimize my distress in this situation?
Mm-hmm.
You just take a deep breath and say, well, my kids aren't answering the phone, so I can go camp out on their front step, or I maybe could invite them out to dinner, or I can offer to watch their kids, and it's there's only so many things you can do, but we shouldn't sit around, I think, and just feel sorry for ourselves, take offense at their action.
Right.
We raise them to be independent.
Exactly. So we need to celebrate it. We need to celebrate that independence.
That's right. That's right.
And maybe
look at all the stuff we can do
right
now that we're not in demand.
But I think it's creating connections.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think that's another thing that a lot of people don't talk about is that, okay, when your kids move on and start being independent, what am I going to do with this extra time?
Well, and it's also, I don't know if you found, but then all these people that have been in your life like disappear.
Right.
Because it's not convenient anymore. You're not all at the soccer field, or you're not all going to the football game at college, or like you had kind of these built-in ways to get together, and all of a sudden, you don't really have that connection anymore. And so it's finding like who's your tribe and who are your people, and that's hard.
Great suggestion. So what suggestions do you have for women when the people that they've always hung around with are no longer around? What are some creative ways to establish new friendships? It used to be our kids that kind of helped us make those relationships, or our husbands' jobs, make couples friends and stuff like that. What are some ways you help suggest to women how to connect with new tribe, new groups?
I think it's like one of the easiest ways, because when you go to school, that's just easy, right? Because you have people and you're doing the same things, so you can talk about what you're doing together, and then natural friendships, or maybe you're playing sports together. And so in our 50s, I would encourage like volunteering, because then you're doing something with somebody else and there's a purpose. Then the trick is to take it outside of that volunteer role. So maybe you go and volunteer at a food pantry, and you establish this talking sort of relationship with another volunteer. But the trick then is to say, hey, after we finish, do you want to go grab lunch?
Great idea.
Yeah.
You know, or you want to take a walk, or maybe the neighbor who you've lived next to for, 5 years, who didn't have kids your same age, so you weren't really friendly with them. Maybe that's when you start that conversation of, hey, you want to go for a walk around the neighborhood, or,
Mhm.
I noticed your beautiful zinnias, what kind are they? Finding some commonality and then taking that additional step. And I will tell you, taking that additional step is a vulnerable point.
It is.
Yes, it
And
is.
you have to let yourself be vulnerable if
Mhm.
you're going to make new connections.
Absolutely.
If you just stand there like on the street corner and wait for somebody to befriend you,
It's not happening.
it's not happening. And people will start to talk and wonder why.
That's
Why
right.
is Renee standing at the street corner?
You get a cardboard sign and
That's right.
say, I need a friend.
A friend. So doing things like that, getting involved in things you might not have thought would be a good thing originally, or didn't have time for. So like taking like a master naturalist class,
Yeah.
or a master gardener class, or becoming involved in like our local police department has a police academy.
Right.
I've always looked at that. That looks like it's really
I want to
cool.
do it. And so just taking a step out of your comfort zone, because we know that we need to feel a little uncomfortable to learn and change and grow.
Mhm.
And so look at those opportunities. But the advantage of like classes that go on for a couple weeks
Mhm.
is that it gives you more time to figure out, who you connect with, or, maybe learn to play pickleball. That's, by the way, one of my goals this year.
Oh,
I have, it's mine also. I've only played once, and I have all the equipment that's in a box because I've ordered it.
it's so popular.
It's
I'm
fun, but
I'm in the Villages in Florida,
Oh, okay.
biggest retirement
It's
community.
fun.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you what, those pickleball courts are full.
Right.
And I have not tried it
Not
yet.
ventured out yet.
So where are you going to learn? Where is there a
There is
local gym?
well, there's a local pickleball association
Yes,
that
there is.
does
No
beginner
kidding.
classes once a month.
That's the one. That's the one time that I've done it.
Okay.
It's really pretty good. I think we do need to get ourselves involved in that. But it is. I mean, you're right. It is like you find people that are doing kind of these things that are different for you, which is also good. It's good for your, when you like your brain, because you're learning something
Right.
different, which keeps you younger, which helps your mental health. I mean, so it's like
That's
all of this, when you hear about like physical and mental, and
Right.
it's
Exactly.
all
Yeah.
interwoven, and so you
That's
really
a
have to
huge
kind of look at
that's
that.
a huge connection to make, especially for women our age too. I mean, you could sit around and do Sudoku and crossword puzzles
Right.
and stuff, but at the same time, when you can integrate all those things, like I started taking some line dancing classes.
Mhm.
Same reason, they're loaded with people, and trying to remember the steps and moving my feet in accordance with the step, plus having upbeat music in the background, so music is helpful, movement is helpful, community is helpful, memory is, having to memorize something is helpful. And that incorporates all those things at
Mhm.
one time that'll ward off, I think, anxiety and depression. If
I think it's
if you
also
said, like you'd said, Renee, is
Mhm.
to take the risk and do
Take a
that.
risk. I think also a thing that is freeing, and it's probably best to write it down, is kind of sit with yourself and write down what you thought your life was going to be at this age, and really detail it.
Yeah.
So you're really going into, this is what I assumed, this is what I planned on my life being.
Mm-hmm.
And then looking at it and going, okay, what is my life though? Like, is it what I thought it was going to be?
Mm-hmm.
It's probably not.
Right.
I mean, I still laugh when I was in my teens, early teens. I thought that by age 25, I would be a lawyer. I would have an Afghan dog,
Oh,
a
that is
Palomino
detailed.
horse,
Oh,
a blonde
that.
Camaro that somehow could pull my blonde horse trailer with my Palomino in it.
Ah,
Right. And at 25, when I was in the process of getting my master's, I didn't have a dog, I didn't have a horse, I didn't have, that was the moment where I was like, why am I feeling so down? Like, I'm pursuing what I want, but I had to go back and think about what my younger self sort of planned on my life being.
Yeah.
And so now that we're in our 50s and now that there's this time of change, we need to really look at what we thought it was going to be and then let go of it.
And I guess that's a
agree.
grief process,
Right.
you know,
Well,
when,
it's, go ahead, Marianne.
no, it's just, I guess anytime we have a transition or a disappointment or a loss, even if it's an imagined loss,
Mhm.
you still have to grieve it. It's not what you thought. That's a great suggestion.
Well, and someone mentioned that we were speaking with earlier is sometimes like retirement, like what does retirement look like? So when you hear what retirement was, it was like you stopped working and you kind of hung around, like there was like not a plan. And so now here we are, we, you know, the big first generation of women that had like big professional careers, and we were hyper involved with our families and our kids. And I mean, now what does retirement look like? Like that's like this big looming question of I can now do what I want, but I haven't really had to think about that. I've just kind of like meandered my way through life, and you know, things have come along.
Mhm.
And that causes a lot of anxiety because we're not prepared for what retirement is supposed to look like.
That's right. And
Just
what's neat is the workshops and courses that we offer that enable women um, to determine what they want it to be. If it's not what you want more, because you're always kind of feeling like, you know, like it, and is that all there is type of feeling? Is this it? I get to sit here and have lunch with my husband every day, you know, that kind of thing. And it's no, instead, maybe I want to start a nonprofit. Maybe I want to tutor kids at school. Maybe I want to, you know, it's actually a wonderful opportunity to say, hey, my life, I might have more years behind me than I have before me, but I got a whole bunch of years potentially still to go. And so how am I going to spend this next 25 years? And so now we have choices we've never had before. And I guess knowing you have choices is a big deal, because
Well,
I think a lot of
scary.
times women, it is scary, because that's what Lorna talk about when you said, now I can do anything I want. Well, what do I
yeah,
want?
that was like so hard. I mean, I was like, what? Because I had been on this runaway train my entire life, really. Like I just kind of went from one thing to another, and it was a combination of COVID and having to just pause. And then when it was like, oh, I could do whatever I want, like it took me 8 months to put a resume together, and I hired someone, and now I look at it and I'm like, it's not what I want to do. But I was like, what do I want to do? Like that question was so big and so looming for me. Like I didn't know. And I thought, well, I could do this and I could do that. And I'm really good at this and I'm really good at that. But I'm like, I don't want to really spend the rest of my life doing that stuff anymore. And I would interview, and I was like talking myself out of the job in the interview because I'm like, I don't want to do this. I do not want this. And I'm sure they're like, why is she like interviewing for this job? But as I learned more, I was like, I do not. This is so not what I want to do. So I think that women don't really appreciate or understand, like when it's like, I mean, like for me, I was like, I could do whatever I want. And then it's like, yikes,
What's
like,
that? Right.
what is that? Like, that is, you know, I hired worked at the life coach. I went to see a therapist. I kind of had like this tribe of women that really would help me listen to me and talk to me and ask me questions. But that was like really hard. And I mean, I was experienced a lot of anxiety and I was depressed and I didn't really realize that. But then I was like, why am I like, I remember one day I was walking in the family room and I was kind of like hunched. And my husband said, why are you walking so hunched? And then I was like, I am, like, I didn't even realize it. But I think it was because it was so heavy for me. It was just, but I think I don't think what I was feeling is abnormal. I think there are a lot of women out there that really kind of go through that, and you're like, now I I mean, I don't know. I always kind of joke, like in my youngest son, when he went off to college, he was kind of a quiet high schooler. And I said to him, you get to go to college and you get to reinvent yourself. And he was like, well, I don't want to do that. I like myself. So when I was thinking like that, like I want to reinvent myself, but I was like, what does that mean? Because I do like who I am, but how do I show up as me and do what brings me joy? That's a big looming question. And I think, yeah, I mean, I'm sure you see this with other women in their 50s, but with all of these competing priorities, how do you get yourself? I mean, for me, and this is really a lot of why we started Isn't She Amazing? It was my tribe. Like, I don't think I could have gotten through it without them.
And that goes back to what Renee was suggesting, was to make new connections.
Right.
Because if you were feeling that way and I was feeling that way and Renee feels that way, it's kind of like a common feeling, as being kind of like the earth's moving under your feet a little bit, and you need to reach out and grab the hands of other women, and not to be afraid, I think, because I think reaching out to others is a great idea, but I think it helps to know they're probably feeling a similar way, and they'd be delighted if you called them and said, hey, maybe we could start a hiking group, or hey, maybe we could go out to lunch, or maybe we could have coffee, or I mean, that's how we started connecting, Lorna, was just we're going out for a drink or lunch or something like that, and just talking, and it made a really strong connection. So Renee, I think the suggestions you're making to prevent an onset, or limit an onset of depression or anxiety, is to understand what you have control of. And you've made some great suggestions, the reaching out to other people, to writing things down, to taking a breath, and not taking on responsibilities that aren't yours to take on, and to really getting to know yourself. I think that's really, really valuable advice. So thank you for that. So here's the one thing we always do at the end of our podcast.
Okay.
Is where we try to give our audience one thing that they can do today that will move them in a healthier direction. Now, I know there's a lot of things you could suggest, but I'm wondering, what's the first thing that pops up into your mind as women 50, 60, 70, 80, just what's one thing, if they're watching this and thinking, yep, I need a change? What would you suggest to them to do first?
Connection. And Surgeon General just released a report that we have a loneliness epidemic, that over 50% of all adults are lonely. Over 62% of all children are lonely. And we also know that a spontaneous connection has more protective factors related to it for your mental health and well-being than a standing lunch date once a week.
I remember you said that to me one day when we
and as little as like 3 minutes. So for anyone
like
out
somebody
there,
standing at the grocery line with you, or
strike up a conversation. So like I went to the doctor's 2 weeks ago, and I checked in and I turned around and immediately I was like, oh, there's nobody sitting over there. So I'm going to go over there, and I'm like, wait a second. This is an opportunity for me to connect. And there was a Vietnam veteran sitting there with his dog, and I sat right next to him, and we had a 5-minute conversation. And so even like calling somebody you haven't talked to in a while, again, it's being vulnerable. I could have sat down next to that Vietnam vet, and I could have tried to start a conversation, and he could have wanted nothing of it, but at least I tried.
Right.
And so any way we can connect, is that, baking more cookies or bread than you really need so you can give it to your neighbor that you haven't talked to in months? Is it just, looking in your phone book or on your phone to see who you haven't talked to?
I love that. Powerful stuff. And these are things we can do, things that don't cost any money, just taking a risk. I love that, Renee. Thank
And it
you.
enriches your life. It enriches your life just as, I mean, you're always, you're surprised sometimes when you do take that and become vulnerable.
Right.
How it enriches you.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And I want to thank you for joining us today too. What a special treat to get to
Thank you.
talk about this.
It's always a special treat to see Renee.
because she's amazing.
Because she's amazing.
We're all amazing.
We're all amazing. That's the whole point. And so we just thank you for joining us today. And we just encourage our audience to listen to Renee and make a new connection today.
Mhm.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us.